So we're now going to just start with a question before I even get to the title slide. But what is the oldest form of psychotherapy in the world? If you suggested it could be hypnosis or hypnotherapy, actually, you would be correct. The oldest form of psychotherapy in at least the Western world is hypnosis, or what we also now call hypnotherapy. We also have seen this in the Eastern world as well, but we can at least document it in the Western. It goes back at least as far as the earliest documented records is in Egypt with the sleep temples of Imhotep. We also see it in ancient Greece as well with a similar concept. Patients, clients, however you want to call them, would come from miles and miles away to these sleep temples, and they would sit in the temples and eventually go to sleep. And these priests, some of which would just go on and tell stories. And this concept of storytelling is actually something we still use in hypnosis today. And they would tell these stories, and they would, the patients, that is, they would get some of their problems solved, either directly through that, or maybe when they were going to sleep, they'd come up with a new idea that would fix their issue. Sometimes, and I know this was like this in ancient Greece, some people would actually, visualize one of the gods, popping up and telling them what to do or to give them advice. And we do at least have that early documentation. Hypnosis, or something similar, is found in nearly every culture of the world. The anthropologist in me does like looking at other cultures, and apparently this might be a trait with hypnotists, but a lot of practitioners are also very into anthropology, and they also like looking to see if there's anything similar. And a lot of it has a lot of similarities with other things that are going on, even in isolated tribes. Usually the shaman, medicine man, that type of role, it's a role, and that's a term that I think most people can use. Those are usually the people most likely to practice something along these lines. There are several notable practitioners. Now, all of those 4 people on that list, they are white men, which honestly, there's a lot of white men in hypnosis. At least that's been my experience. I'm actually trying to see if that's truly the case. But Anton Mesmer is the first person on that list. And he has been, his last name has been loaned out to this thing called mesmerism, which is, basically one of the terms that got used for this. He believed everything was a form of magnetism. And that's what he really was pushing. He believed that this magnetism, whatever that he was generating, that was making some of his patients, go to sleep or whatnot, he really thought it was a cure-all for pretty much everything, and it really wasn't. But he really was a strong believer in this magnetism situation. If you look at his dates, you might remember this nice gentleman called Ben Franklin. He was around during this time. Ben Franklin and a few other notable scientists actually came to study Mesmer, and Mesmer was supposed to predict which tree I think had been, or somebody was supposed to predict which tree had been magnetized, and it, well, didn't go according to plan, because it's not quite what's going on here. A few years later, we have James Braid. Now, he is considered the father of modern hypnosis. He was a Scottish surgeon, and he spent his entire life basically studying hypnosis and doing experiments. He ran into a lot of Mesmer students. I'm not sure if he actually ran into Mesmer himself based on, the overlap, but certainly he did run into his students. And I don't think he was overly fond of them. He spent an awful lot of time basically seeing what was real and what wasn't real. While Mesmer students were very much, this can fix everything, and it was actually very, very theatrical a lot of times. James Braid was very, very, straight-laced. He just wanted to find the truth of what was going on, regardless of what was going on. As you notice, he also was a surgeon. He also would do stuff with his patients, and this is during a time where you're not having a lot of, let's say, anesthetic, and he would work in hypnosis with his patients, and he had a very, very high success rate. His surgeries went really well, especially given the time period, and a lot of people were very interested in what he was doing because, again, he was doing stuff that was very strange in comparison to other people, but he was getting really, really good results. Another person on this list, Freud. I think a lot of people have learned about Freud, but when James Braid was doing his work, like I said, the scientific community became very interested, and eventually, when Sigmund Freud came onto the scene, people were already doing this work. Now, Freud, sometimes his job title, the exact job he had, doesn't really get translated very well. But some people say he's going to be like a psychologist or psychiatrist. Some people are going to say he's a neurologist. His actual job title doesn't change. But a lot of people do think of him as a psychologist of some form. He actually was incredibly, was an incredible supporter of hypnosis for a very, very long time. Now, the thing about Freud is that Freud was very proper. In fact, if anybody has ever seen those stereotype offices of, a therapist with the patient kind of pointing away from the psychoanalyst, that actually comes down to one of his issues because he didn't want to stare at female patients. But if he actually, this whole thing about him not wanting to stare at female patients is that he was very, very prim, very proper, or, and well, he also may have been very, very shy too. But he was working with a subject, and the subject, for whatever reason, got up, walked over to him, and kissed him. At that moment, he stopped practicing hypnosis and spent the rest of his life pretty much being very, very anti-hypnosis. All because somebody got up and kissed him. Yeah. Another person that's important to know, especially if you are going into the medical field, is Milton Erickson. He was a psychiatrist and still is one of the most famous medical hypnotists in the world. He was a very interesting person there. If you ever want to look at a person that overcame a lot of odds, this is your guy to look at. This poor man was tone deaf. He suffered from polio, got polio at one point, ended up being paralyzed. Later would reteach himself how to walk. Went through like this really long trip alone to build his strength up before he went to college. He said he taught himself to walk. He was severely dyslexic. It took him several years before he realized that the dictionary was in alphabetical order. Was severely colorblind. Apparently he could only see things in black and white. Although he did have a real affection for the color purple. So he actually wore an awful lot of purple. And purple is now associated with hypnosis in part because of him or something like that. He then later would suffer through polio again because this poor man could not catch a break. He also would be influenced not only hypnosis but also therapies in general. He's partially where we get things like the double bind, and as well as therapies that he influenced included possibility therapy. That's actually from one of his students, Bill O'Hanlon. He influenced NLP, which is, if you're going to go into sales, you're probably going to end up taking a class in NLP just to make sales, regardless of how ethical I think that may not be. He also had other influences, such as the various solution-focused brief therapies, and he actually had influence on an awful lot of therapies that we practice today. And he also created one of the most well-known hypnosis organizations, American Society for Clinical Hypnosis. And that is actually considered the gold standard if you're going to go off and get some type of certification. We're actually going to talk about them. They're going to come up a few more times in this field, but I wanted to at least bring that in. And that was created in, ASH was created in, I think 1958 or something like that. What does you think of when you think of hypnosis? If you're like many people, you're probably going to think of something out of the movies, and a lot of that is less than accurate. A lot of hypnotists, every time a hypnosis is mentioned in a movie, they all run into the movie, and we usually end up getting very upset because very few of them have a good, honest representation of what all of this is like. For those of us who've spent our years of our lives studying this, we kind of get very, very protective of it. I had a friend who wanted to see a specific movie that came out in the past few years. She knew that I probably wasn't going to ever see it with her, and when she went off to a medical school interview, a medical residency interview, she watched it on the plane, and she came back and told me what her thoughts were, and she was like, "I'm glad I didn't watch it with you. You'd be very, very upset." But here are some times for you to think about what you think about when you think of hypnosis. Of course, here's your joke of the day. Last night, a hypnotist convinced me I was a soft, malleable metal with an atomic number of 82. I'm easily led.
How you doing? Ever been hypnotized?
Yes.
You have? Are you relaxed right now? I want to show you something really, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to go over to a handheld mic because I'm going to be working with you. Dan, how you feeling?
Good.
You think you're hypnotized right now?
No.
Watch this. Watch the mic. How you doing, sir? Okay, now you're all wide awake, right? Mike?
Yeah.
And you're not hypnotized, right? Sleep, way in deep, way in deep. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stuck like glue to the seat of your chair. Cannot get up out of that chair no matter how hard you try till I touch your forehead. Stuck like glue, Mike, till I touch your forehead. 1, 2, 3, sing, I'm straight in the chair. All right, so you don't think you're hypnotized, right?
No.
Okay, try to get up out of the chair, see what happens. Harder you try, the tighter you stick. The harder you try, the more difficult it will become. And I want you to try harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. And harder. You keep trying until I touch your forehead. The harder you try, the more difficult it will become. Well, I want you to try as hard as you can. You're not trying hard enough. The harder you try, the tighter you stick. Now, Mike, with his long list of accomplishments here, is obviously a top producer, correct? So you'd have to expect that Mike is somewhat money motivated, somewhat at least, correct? Driven. How many of you all think money motivates people? Let's see by show of hands. Oh. Well, you see, I maintain that money motivates people somewhat, but is not a very powerful motivator many times, because if money really motivated you, you'd have no problem setting goals, you'd have no problem making appointments or asking for referrals or asking for the sale. See, I think what motivates people, come on, Mike, you're not trying hard enough. I want you to try as hard as you can, Mike. All right, well, Mike, maybe he's just being a nice guy. Maybe Mike's not properly motivated. So what do we say in this culture these days? Maybe if we had money in front of him, people say, show me the money, right? Well, let's hear it. Show me the money. Let me hear it. Come on, louder than that. I'll give you $100 if you stand up out of that chair, stuck tight like glue. The harder you try, the tighter you stick. I'll give you $200, Mike. All right, here you go. This is real money, folks. I'll give you 100, I'll give you 200. This is the real shebang here. This is the Ben Franklin. I'll give you $200, Mike, stuck tight. The harder you try, the tighter you stick. Tell you what, Mike, I'll give you 300. I'll give you 300. $300, Mike. 3 $100 bills. I'll tell you what, I'll give you 500. Here you go. $500 there. $500. Tell you what, I'll give you 1,000. 3, 4, 5. There it is. $1,000. $1,000 stuck tighter. I know it's ridiculous. Stuck tighter. The harder you try there. I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2,000. Here's actually $2,000 here. Had to bring the real thing, been carrying this around nervously. All right, here you go. $2,000, Mike. The harder you try, the tighter you stick. $2,000, Mike. $2,000. Say, show me the money. Hey, $2,000, Mike. Mike, you look tired. Sleep. Way, 95, 4, 3, 2, and 1. That's real cash, folks, $2,000. I want to point out a couple things here. First of all, why didn't Mike get up out of the chair for the money? Well, because at that moment, he wasn't focused on the money. At that moment, Mike was focused on being stuck to the chair. And as you see, this focus stuff can help you or it can hurt you. If you're focused on the rejection, if you're focused on the problems, hey, if you're focused on the past, it can paralyze you. If you stay focused on the positive, focused on the future, and focused on what you can accomplish, you can become highly motivated. Because it works both ways. I could have told him something totally different. I could have told him at the count of 3, you're going to jump up out of that chair and run up to there and grab that money, and nothing will stop you. And then you could have had 5 of the biggest guys on the stage trying to hold him down, and I'll guarantee you somehow or another he'd have worked his way out and gotten to the money. So the focus can help you or the focus can hurt you depending on what you're focusing on.
So for people who are listening to this, who here has been hypnotized? Normally I'm doing this in group, but I'm also recording this for for YouTube as well, just so students have easier access to some of these. If you can, think about if you've been hypnotized or not, if you have or not, or at least probably know if you have or not. Now we get to play a game called Have You Ever? I like having my class stand up for this and sit down when they actually have experienced something. So, have you ever gotten lost in a good book so deeply that perhaps your parents called you and called your name and you didn't even respond? This is when I would have those people sit down. Same thing for gotten lost in a movie or TV show. You can sit down. That's also a situation of trance. I actually have a good story about that. My husband, I one time took him and asked him to take out the trash. He was watching TV. An hour goes by. Ask him again to take out the trash, because before he'd said, yeah, I'll get to it in a second. Said, okay. Didn't respond this next time. And then you go in front of him. He looks completely zoned out. His eyes were open. And turned off the TV and stood there. About 10 minutes later, he woke up with a very big start and wondered why the TV was off. He was completely in a trance. How about gotten lost in music? Had a runner's high, or the equivalent if you don't run. Gotten in the zone. This could include video games, or homework, or whatnot. How about missed an exit or spaced out in the car? This is also something called highway hypnosis. I mean, I traveled 90 miles one way to teach, and quite frankly, I can't tell you 90% of what was going on during that run. Probably for the best, honestly, because it's a boring run. Only pay attention when I have to slow down. So, by this point, usually nobody is still standing, but if you are still standing, you probably actually have still experienced something else, because sleep, you actually have to transition through a trance state to get to sleep. So, congratulations, you have all experienced the common everyday trance, which is a form of hypnosis. So what is hypnosis? It's a state of consciousness involving focused attention and reduced peripheral awareness, characterized by enhanced capacity for response to suggestion. For those who are familiar with low and high levels of awareness, this would count as a high level of awareness, just like mindfulness. So other phrases we've got, hypnotic induction. When we are getting to the point where we are focusing somebody's attention and reducing that awareness, that is, inducing the trance process, that is what we call an induction. There are a few other stages to a typical hypnosis session. It starts with that induction of creating the hypnotic trance. Sometimes there will be a deepener, and then, well, it depends on if a deepener is needed, but sometimes there is a deepener. There's usually the suggestion phase, and then another phase, which, depending on where you are, can either be called emergence, or reorientation. I think there are a few other terms for it, but that's when you're coming out of the hypnotic state and coming back into a more normal state of consciousness. hypnotizability. That is a very important phrase, a term there. And that's basically that ability to experience, well, hypnosis. These are people who are, the higher levels of hypnotizability, you're more likely to have what are called positive and negative hallucinations that are caused by the hypnotist. But there are a variety of levels of hypnotizability from low, medium to high. Plus, there are also some people that respond to certain types of hypnotic techniques more than others. As far as hypnotherapy, that's basically that use of hypnosis in treating medical or psych conditions. So now we get to play true or false. Hypnosis is a magic power. True or false? Regardless of what you may see in the movies or hear other people saying, hypnosis really isn't a magical power. It's actually not magic at all. It actually isn't that hard to learn either. There are a lot of kids in elementary school where they're starting to learn this. They're learning very, very basic hypnosis techniques and doing okay at them, actually. But a lot of people still believe that it's magic, of the devil, whatever, and it is unfortunate, but people do believe that. Here's another one. True or false? Only weak-willed and unintelligent people can be hypnotized. So, turns out that's also false. As far as the weak-willed part of this, let me just say that I've dealt with a lot of very, very strong-willed people. And in my experience, pretty much the stronger the will, the harder they fall, to be honest with you. But that's my experience. As far as unintelligent people, well, actually, if you look at some of the data, the more intelligent you are, actually, there is an effect size. I think it's a small effect size, if I'm remembering, where you're more likely to actually be able to be hypnotized. So there is a small effect size for intelligence, suggesting they're more likely to be hypnotized. Although that may also have some confound variables involved in that. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure they've ever checked a confound such as education, for example, because more college and that type of thing actually can influence, your ability to practice and to focus on, one thing or another. So that might have a impact in there. I'm not really sure, to be honest. People can enter trance and not awaken. True or false? We have been doing various forms of hypnosis, hypnotherapy, or trance work for a few thousand years. And I have yet to see any reference to anything, even in the literature that's very, very anti-hypnosis. I've yet to actually see any reference to any person who's entered trance and not awakened. Never seen any reference to anybody who's died in trance. That isn't to say that it isn't, I guess, possible, but in thousands of years, there hasn't been a single case. I'm sure somebody could go into trance, happen to have a heart attack, and then pass, but that has nothing to do with the trance. And quite frankly, even that isn't referenced anywhere in the literature. If anybody does find a situation where somebody went into trance and died, please let me know, because I've been looking for it for the past several years and so far hasn't really found anything. Even if it's a situation where maybe the hypnotist isn't doing so well, maybe the hypnotist passes away when the person's in trance, they will still wake up. eventually. Let's say that there is an example of I'm the hypnotist working with a client, and I'm working on them, and I have a heart attack, and the person's still in trance. One of two things are probably going to happen. One, the person will wake up immediately or almost immediately, just a few seconds. If that happens, I'm hoping they call 911 and get me to a hospital. Or another option is they convert to sleep, and after a nice little nap, they wake up and realize what happened, and hopefully they can still help me get to a hospital. Hopefully it's not too late for me. But either way, they're waking up. Here's this phrase, I can't be hypnotized. I have had so many people say they can't be hypnotized. I had one person who said she wasn't 100% sure that she could be, and I got her during the pre-talk. I didn't even start with an induction yet. And that's just because I happen to know how to present hypnosis in a really interesting way that she could relate to it, because I actually knew her job as well. I actually used to work for her company, and gave a great example. And it worked wonderful for her. She went into trance without me even having to do an induction. But as we know, pretty much everybody can be hypnotized. Even people who are deaf, you just have to do it a little bit different way. People who are blind, maybe not focusing on visualization would be a good path in that way. Let's see here. People can be made to do anything against their will. True or false? So far, we've never been able to get anybody to do anything against their will. If you go up to somebody like, that's going off onto a stage show, realistically, they A, want to be hypnotized, and B, want to basically make a fool out of themselves. Generally speaking, the idea is that you're not going to do anything, first of all, against your will or against your value system. And you're also probably not going to do anything that you wouldn't do while drunk. That being said, there are people that believe that people can be made to do whatever. And here's the thing. Where I live right now, at the moment of this recording, September 2021, I'm currently living in Augusta, Georgia. I don't want to be living in Augusta, Georgia. As I told my clients, if I could do anything, make people do anything against their will, value system, or anything else, I probably wouldn't be living here. I wouldn't have student loan debt, and certainly I probably would live in the Bahamas or somewhere that isn't Augusta. So people cannot be made to do anything against their will. If you're going to go rob a bank, you're probably going to do it, whether I say anything or not, or whatnot, or maybe you'll do it when drunk. In a trance, you're unaware of everything. This is a it depends situation. There is a small group of people that become go very, very deep into trance, where they do become unaware of everything. Even the hypnotic virtuosos, which make up 10 to 15% of a standard population, that means they go into trance really, really easy. Only a small percentage of them will go into a somnambulistic state. I'm unfortunately one of those people, and I was in training with another student hypnotist. She just wanted to practice her deepeners. Didn't even do an induction. I lost her 3 minutes in, and I got awoken by my Fitbit, which was vibrating because I wasn't paying attention to the emergence commands. So that was that, yeah. Maida was horrified. My friend Arthur thought it was hilarious. So trance is like feeling drugged, true or false? So for the most part, that's going to be false. It does help to find out what somebody feels like when they are in trance, but there's not really that much consistency. Some people feel feel very, very heavy. Some people feel light. Most people don't feel drugged. If they do feel drugged, it's probably because we told them to feel drugged, quite frankly. It could be very, very helpful if you're dealing with something like pain management, for example. Hypnosis is a cure-all. True or false? Regardless of what we may say, that people may say, hypnosis is not a cure-all. It is used for a lot of things, but can't cure everything. This goes back to the conversation we had about Mesmer. Mesmer thought it was a cure-all for everything. People will use your neuroscience of hypnosis. People may see different hertz levels for different brainwaves activity. Take whatever your textbook suggests. But reminder, there's gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. The first time I ever heard about gamma actually was reading this paper from Jensen et al. I had no idea gamma was a thing because they rarely talk about that in a lot of psychology courses. But hypnotized subjects, what he found, had this theta gamma coupling, which basically means during a hypnotic state, they've been jumping between theta and gamma back and forth into little bursts. So that's actually showing that very interesting, state that's occurring, and that might be a real signifier for when we know definitely trance is definitely occurring. We're trying to do a lot of work to say, well, when is it occurring? What part of the brains are active? This might be giving some suggestions, at least a little bit, in that area. There's still a lot more to be discovered, like why is it doing that? How is it doing that? So that's something to note. And people who are of a higher hypnotizable levels do tend to show more theta waves. So that's kind of an interesting little thing. When you're looking at hypnotizability, you're mostly going to see one of these three scales. There are lots of other scales out there. The hypnotizability scale I was trained on at first isn't even listed in here, honestly. And that's from a college in LA. But most research is going to have these three. The older stuff is only going to have Harvard or Stanford. The Elkins scale is actually relatively new. I actually know somebody else besides Dr. Elkins who was on that paper. At least I think my mentor at SESH, I think, was on was actually the primary on it. But these are basically very standardized ways of trying to test hypnotic suggestibility. Usually they're trying to find out if you basically can produce either positive or negative hallucinations, and you're scored that way. So it would seem that it's roughly like a third, at least in all the scales I've looked at. Generally, it does tend to be like that. Which means that's good. That means they could all be correctly correlated. But some of them are easier to do than others. Like, it's my understanding the Elkins scale is actually much easier to do than, say, Harvard. And I can't remember what Stanford looks like off the top of my head. But those are the three scales. Factors in hypnotizability. A lot of it some of it comes down to stuff like intelligence. There is a small effect size for intelligence. With a little bit greater intelligence, meaning you're probably more likely to do better. Higher visualization rate. That doesn't mean that people who are blind can't be hypnotized. It just might be a little bit more of a challenge. But people who can visualize basically almost anything, especially when their eyes are closed, will tend to do better. I did meet a person who had no ability to visualize. I did get her into a trance. It was just a very different trance than what I was, very different induction than what I was using, in a very, very different experience than what I was used to doing, because I do rely heavily on visualization. She ended up seeing things just completely unexpectedly, but not quite where we were going. But she was still really, really thrilled about the experience. There's also some evidence that people with higher empathy and sensitivity rates are, is a factor in hypnotizability. I have a friend who's a professor over at Naropa, who actually worked on this. I love him, but his last name is very, very long. It's 14 letters long. So everybody just calls him Dr. Ian. So if you ever go to Naropa and say, "Where's Dr. Ian?" well, they'll point you to his direction. Yeah, poor man, lovely man. He did a lot of work on that, and his father also was a hypnosis researcher as well, also with the same name. So I just have to look for the 2 at the bottom in the author name to see if it's my friend or his dad. And one of the textbooks that the open source textbooks actually does cite him. So this other concept, increased absorption personality trait, well, that is linked to openness to the experience. There's some evidence to say that there might be more activity in the right hemisphere. Some studies have found yes, some studies have found no. So it's kind of really controversial. We do need more work on that. Increased dissociative rate. This is a big thing. There are a few specific disorders that does make you more likely to be hypnotizable. Various forms of schizophrenia are related, post-traumatic stress, and dissociative identity disorder. Those are linked to higher ones, and I think schizophrenia was the top, but I can't remember off the top of my head. All 3 of those are very important when it comes to a factor. There have been about 400 different things that hypnosis has been used for, as far as the literature is concerned. That includes smoking, weight loss, confidence. Those 3 things are the things that most people are probably most familiar with. Smoking and weight loss and confidence are the things that basically the lay hypnotists are actually allowed to do. Most of these other things do require a medical referral or an actual license to practice. So we're looking at pain management. That's one of my big ones because I'm also an EMT. I work a lot with pain. I also work a lot with anxiety. All of these things I have actually worked on. People are also, some of them are surprised, some of them are not surprised to know about sports. Sports is a really, really big thing. Tiger Woods, it does self-hypnosis basically every day to help improve his golf game. And a lot of teams actually do keep a hypnotist on retainer for various parts of their season. But this all comes down to visualization, and if they can visualize what they're doing, it actually really, really helps. I had this one person that came in. I thought I was working on one thing. It turns out I was working on playing pool. He wanted me to help play pool because somebody was getting in it on his head. He ended up go into the pool hall 2 hours after the session, won like $700 or something like that. And I was like, wow, off one game. I said, I guess it worked. And for the record, I know nothing about playing pool. Here is another thing about hypnosis and pain management. Okay.
Here's our science man Michael Mosley on how, remarkably, hypnotherapy can be used actually in place of general anaesthetic, believe it or not.
What happens if you need an operation, but for psychological or medical reasons you can't or won't have an anaesthetic? Well, incredible as it sounds, some people opt for hypnotism. So how does it work? I'm off to find out.
At Birmingham University, Dr. Stuart Derbyshire studies pain, and he's about to inflict some on me.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically put this heat pad onto your arm, and what you will feel is you'll feel very rapid pulses of heat.
Ooh, ooh. Pain is both mental and physical. What happens is when the pain receptors, called the nociceptors, in my arm are activated, a signal goes via my spinal cord to my brain, and it's in my brain this mysterious thing we call pain occurs, and that's when I go, ouch.
To find my pain threshold, Stuart racks up the temperature until it really hurts.
And let's see how this one feels.
Ooh, that was actually...
Yes.
That one hit my threshold, I think. Now, actually, that was very painful, and I can still feel it in my skin. Now, normally, if I was going to have an operation, I would have a drug which would block the action of the pain. What Stuart is going to attempt to do in the moment is hypnotise me as though I had had an anaesthetic. I find it incredibly hard to believe that that will work, but we'll find out.
OK, Michael, I'd just like you to sit back in your chair. So just allow yourself to feel the tension draining as you relax. Your body. You feel the weight lighter and lighter. And now I'm going to put the probe onto your arm as we did before.
Then Stuart turns up the heat. But although I'm aware of it, this time it isn't hurting.
And how did that feel?
Quite pleasant.
He takes the temperature as high as he can safely go, and I'm still relaxed. Then we go one step further. I asked him in advance to try driving a needle into my hand.
You won't feel anything at all.
He pushes the needle in as far as it will go. All I feel is a tugging sensation.
I'm going to pull the pin out now. You won't feel anything as it pulls out of your skin. And one. Eyes open.
Hello.
Wide awake. How did that feel?
It was fine. I mean,
Yeah?
it was interesting because when the heat probe on, it sort of felt like warm suntan lotion going on. You did actually shove the pin through.
I did, and that didn't seem to bother you.
No.
But how is this possible? And how is the pain being blocked? To find out, Stuart has been using functional magnetic resonance imaging to peer inside the brains of hypnotised subjects.
So this is a group of subjects that are receiving that same heat that you received earlier, and they're clearly activating this part of the brain here, which is called the anterior cingulate cortex. And we know from many, many studies that every time somebody reports pain, we activate this part of the brain.
It seems it's here we become aware of pain, and under hypnosis, its activity alters dramatically.
Right, so the yellow area has disappeared, now you've got a blue area which denotes basically reduced activity.
Exactly, yeah. So if you think of this as being an area which generates pain, when you're told not to experience pain, it switches itself off, and consequently you don't feel any pain.
Although the brain is still receiving pain signals, for some reason it isn't processing them.
So how does the hypnotist actually do this?
One theory is that the hypnotist somehow divides the person's consciousness into two bits. A bit that's still experiencing the pain and a bit that isn't experiencing the pain. Other people argue that somehow the hypnotist takes control of those basic sensory processes and switches them on or switches them off. How does that work? Who knows?
So there we go. And apologize for anybody who didn't like needles in that last slide. I keep forgetting to give warnings about that. But as far as safety is concerned, hypnosis is overall actually pretty safe in trained hands. Lay people can cause problems, especially if you don't know fully what you're doing. So it's always helpful to be aware and to actually learn more about the person that you might want to have hypnotizing you. You should probably check their number of training hours and where they were trained. I went to a dedicated school for hypnosis. I had to have over 300 lecture hours before I was ever allowed to work with a client. Then I had to have 200 hours with somebody basically over me and supervising me before I was allowed to get certified. So that was 400 hours, or I'm sorry, it was 500 hours. Whoo-wee. It was 500 hours before I was allowed to actually do anything. There are other organizations that are doing things over a weekend. There are a few other organizations that literally all you have to do is sign your name to a piece of paper, mail it in with the money, and they send you a thing saying that you're certified. So also should be very aware about information like that. Should also try to check their academic credentials. I know at least one person that has that makes sure she puts her bachelor's degree at the end of her thing, which please don't do that. It already looks bad. You should only be doing that if you have graduate or up, at least in this country. But she has like a bachelor's, and I think it was in like theater and film or something like that. Now, I don't have any objections to people with backgrounds in theater and film. I have a theater background too. However, the background in theater is not really relevant to that, and they should probably be aware of that. Always get their actual stuff. They should be able to, any hypnotist should be able to give you their academic credentials, not only their academic credentials, also where they were trained, and an estimate as to how they're trained, what their training hours are. Some of them will already have a CV on their website that you can literally just check, and you can see how good something is or not. If they can't say where they were trained, or you find out that they're kind of sketchy, don't do it. If you can't see that they've been doing continuing education hours, probably shouldn't be doing that either. So that's something to be considered. Or if they won't tell you that at all, also that means run away. Just saying. If you don't know where to find a hypnotist, you might want to reach out to your doctor. Your doctor might have some connections in the area of somebody who might also be practicing hypnosis, and may have, hopefully has a master's or higher in a field, in a relevant field, and hopefully will have really good training as well. Also, and this seems to be a small thing, but see if they have malpractice. Malpractice for a hypnotist, for a part-time hypnotist, is $200 a year. It's a small thing. We very rarely have to actually use our malpractice because we almost never get sued. Very, very hard to sue a hypnotist. But that's basically a sign that they are doing this professionally. Seriously, my renewal is in June. I'm not joking. It's around $200 or just a little bit over. It's not a big burden. For those who want to learn more about hypnosis, you can look at the American Society for Clinical Hypnosis. That's ASH. It's founded by Milton Erickson from several slides ago. APA Division 30. You don't have to be a member of the APA to just join Division 30. You can also learn more from International Society for Hypnosis. They are based in Europe, and right now I can't tell you where they're based because I can't remember, but they have a very long history as well. And Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis is another option as well. They're based in the U.S. as well, actually, the only one that isn't based in the U.S. is ISH, which is International Society. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop a line, drop an email. You guys know where to find me. And for those who want the rest of the references, here's some references in case you wanted to go back. Okay, thank you.